Hey, I'm Sarah Smith, family doctor, clinical day advisor, and the chatting coach. Welcome back to Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast, where we're going to be interviewing peers or world experts who can help us think about our clinical day in a way that is more sustainable and create time for our lives outside of medicine. The holiday season is nearly upon us, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to help you get that backlog done ahead of time. I know that backlog of incomplete charts and in baskets can weigh heavily as we go into the holiday season. And this is a very special backlog buddy session where we're going to do 30 minutes of strategy for your backlog together, and then have 90 minutes of working together time where you can actually get that backlog started and well underway. Because it's meeting style, hopefully, there's less disturbance. And working together means that you will have accountability of others and less opportunity for procrastination as you are there ready to work on that backlog. This is an opportunity to get ready ahead of time for the holiday season to give you more time to have with family or friends. Go to chartingcoach.ca/holidays, and we will see you there. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today we have with us Victoria Lister, who is also in Australia, so that's kind of fun. We're meeting early in the morning for us in our local time. Welcome. I will let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for having me. At the moment, I work in research, so I'm involved with the business school at Griffith University here in Brisbane, in Queensland, and I have a number of different projects on the go, as most researchers do. My principal project is a PhD, and I'm in the final stretch of that. And that involves working with junior doctors, or has involved talking to junior doctors and hearing about their working conditions concerns and why they're not able to speak up about them. So from there, I became or decided to become a workplace coach so I could support junior doctors and also junior academics like myself who go through similar sorts of processes in terms of their experiences as new professionals. So I do that, and then I have other research projects that constellate in and around these kind of topics. So one involves working with emergency medicine clinicians, doctors and nurses, with coaching and looking at coaching as a path to enhancing communication in the workplace. And I'm involved in other projects that, yeah, as I said, constellate in and around mostly medicine, but also academia.
Yeah. What got you interested in this area? Was it something that was handed to you, or were you noticing the junior doctors were having difficulty in this area?
It was entirely serendipitous. At the time that the PhD came to my attention, I was working as a research assistant, and I lost that job because COVID came along. And I thought, well, I'm still interested in research. I just completed a Master of Philosophy, which is another master's level research degree. And so I lost the research assistant role and I looked for more work in a research space. And I came across a job ad for a scholarship, a PhD scholarship in employee voice in healthcare. I didn't really know what either of those things are or were. And I should explain that I'm actually in the business discipline. I'm not in medical science or health or public health or anything like that. I'm in the business discipline, but there are a lot of avenues for exploring the kinds of issues that are of interest to people in the healthcare space through a business lens. So specifically, I'm in an area called employee voice and silence. An employee voice is, well, it simply refers to all the ways and means that employees might want to speak up about issues that impact them at work or issues that impact the organization. So silence was the more interesting of the two to me. So that's the road I went down, and the path that I chose in terms of looking at the healthcare space around voice and silence. And I honed in on junior doctors as a group who are particularly vulnerable to silence at work and being silenced at work. And I wanted to know why that was the case. So that's what led me down that road. So I've been on a very steep learning curve for the past 5.5 years, but I feel at home in this space. It's a deeply interesting space, and it needs to be addressed. The problem of employee silence has been long recognized in healthcare because of its implications for patient safety. Even if you become a GP, you've done your hospital years, those early years. And there's a lot of emphasis in the hospital space on patient safety and care, of course, well, in any space, but particularly in the hospital environment, there are often speaking up programs. There's a lot of emphasis on that kind of activity, but not so much on speaking up about your own working conditions and how they impact healthcare professionals' well-being at work.
Mm. Interesting, because you're right. There is the examples we see of junior doctors seeing something that they may not think is correct in regards to patient management. And that would be a really difficult thing, I would imagine, to say something about when you're dealing with quite significantly experienced physicians around you. And then also the conditions. So tell us more about what you learned as you started talking to the junior doctors about their work life.
Yeah. The first thing I learnt when I framed up the study and the interview questions, I didn't focus on either patient safety or working conditions concerns. It was up to the interviewee to discuss what concerned them most at work and what they
Mhm.
couldn't speak up about. Even though patient safety and care issues are very much forefront for this cohort, particularly because they're learning themselves. And all of them stated that that was the hill that they would die on. If something untoward was going to happen to a patient, they would speak up.
Mhm.
I have to say, I'm not sure that I 100% believe that claim, because I did also hear instances in the interviews of times where people had been too frightened to speak
Mm.
up for patient safety. It had massive implications for them if they did, sadly. And they were to do with fears about career progression, training places, retaliation, bullying, harassment, very serious things. But I will say that overwhelmingly, the interviewees wanted to speak to me about their working conditions concerns, and they are the things that they really want to voice in regards to their work life. But there's even less latitude for that to happen in medicine because you're supposed to tough it out, and
Mhm.
you're supposed to be fairly compliant in the way that you conform to medicine and what it requires of you, or what you're told requires of you. I did see that the profession itself was implicated in this silence. So it opened a Pandora's box, put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And the pay and conditions, overtime pay for junior doctors has just become quite topical in Australia because they've just
Mm,
had some wins that I had seen recently in recent weeks about standing up and having a voice. That must have taken a lot of courage to
mm,
start to push back against not having overtime paid. So you've gathered this information, you've learned some of the things that are happening for junior doctors. Tell us what the gap was that you wanted to fill or that you noticed would be helpful for the junior doctors to be able to have a voice or to be able to start to have impact in this area.
mm. I'm not sure that I've been able to solve the problem of
No,
the
no.
silence, but
True.
the gap, yeah, I hope to contribute to the evolution of junior doctor voice. The gap is that the main gap is the topic of working condition silence, because most of the literature focuses on patient safety and the
Mm,
need to speak up for patient safety, and that's understandable. It's a concern for all healthcare professionals. They don't want to be silent about their concerns about their patients. It's also concern for institutions, because if there are compromises to patient safety, that affects their metrics, their outcomes. So everyone is rightly concerned, and we're all concerned as members of the public and potential patients ourselves, and family members of people who are patients. But and that is why the literature goes there. There's
mhm,
very little on working conditions concerns. So, and that's partly for the reasons I just described. There's also I guess, a theoretical dilemma behind that as well. So it comes down to the kind of approach that scholars take to the problem of silence. You can take a perspective that is more an organizational behaviorist perspective, and theoretically, they view silence as a problem to be solved in favor of the organization,
mm,
whereas let's say, what's called a pluralist approach sees silence as a problem for the worker, primarily from that perspective. So they come from a tradition where they're interested in things like union activity as a form of collective voice, which is what you just alluded to in terms of the wins that we've seen recently here in Australia with regards to unpaid overtime, etc. That kind of activity, class actions, legal actions, is another form of collective voice, like union activity. Union activity is not well developed amongst doctors.
mhm,
We doctors have groups like the AMA, strictly not a union, but a professional association. It has ASMOF, which is a union and has a connection to the AMA. But doctors have been traditionally slow to unionize compared to, say, nurses and midwives. It seems to be culturally, in terms of the medical professional culture,
mm,
it's not accepted form or protestation, basically. Can leave doctors with few options, but it's fantastic that they're finding strength in numbers together to launch these class actions that have been very successful, as you say,
mm.
in Australia at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So then back down to the individual, how
Mm.
do we start to create, is it safety? What does the individual junior doctor need to be able to have a voice if they are concerned about working conditions? What does that look like for helping?
Yeah. Safety is the word for sure. So, the whole strand of the literature that talks about psychological safety, which is a coined term in 1999 by Amy Edmondson. And she is also a business researcher. She was doing some research operations as well as healthcare, and found you have to have a feeling of psychological safety if you are able to speak up, that's going to allow you to speak up in a team environment. So she was interested in team environments and what stops people from expressing themselves in a group. Found that, and others have found, if you have enlightened leadership who create an environment in which people feel safe to speak up, you can have this wonderful situation where everyone contributes and it enhances team learning and then ultimately performance. So that I feel that rings true and has been proven to be true. It's not the entire picture, but it is correct, I believe, that people need to feel psychologically safe, and that there are pockets of enlightened leadership in medicine where senior doctors are deliberately creating safe spaces for people to be able to talk about what concerns them, whether it's a patient safety issue or an issue related to their own well-being. So very much so, yes, they do need to foster those environments. Easier said than done, and it doesn't happen perhaps everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So sometimes as a junior doctor, you're paired with senior doctor, you're paired with specialist on the team. You might have a separate mentor. Are these people that the junior doctors are saying that they are able to talk to, or even that is a barrier? They're not feeling like they can adequately bring up issues that they're having for fear of things like harassment, bullying, advancement of.
I didn't hear a lot of my participants talk about mentors or buddies. I believe that these kind of arrangements exist, but I think it's often due to the very mobile nature of the junior doctor situation. They're not in those workplaces often for very long periods of time. As you know, you can be rotated out of, well, you are rotated out of departments frequently until you perhaps decide to settle on a specialization and rotated into different hospitals, the whole bit. It's not to say that those relationships don't exist. And I think it depends who and who that person is and where they're coming from as well. And it's partly a problem of human nature. It's not everyone's going to provide that kind of support or mentorship that you might be looking for. The other problem, or one of the other problems, is competition. A lot of what goes on in these spaces is governed by, well, everyone's got their career trajectory, particularly if they're wanting to take on a non-GP specialization. That becomes very competitive, and there are limited training places. So the person that is your colleague could also be your main source of competition. So there's strange dynamics that underpin medicine that I believe emanate from the upper echelons of the profession and have a little trickle down effect that sort of dictate how the profession behaves as a whole. So, yeah, it's a broader problem.
Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. What is a safe space for a junior doctor then? What have you seen as a reported way for junior doctors to find their voice? Has there been themes that have come through that have been helpful?
Look, I hate to say this, but it's not a problem, but I can't find the right word. It's a condition of my research. I was interested in silence.
Mm,
So the people who came to speak to me were also interested in that topic by and large. Some were, I found, more randomly and didn't necessarily self select into the research in quite the same way. And that was interesting because that's a great way to see if opinions are uniform or where the outliers are. But in all honesty, the findings are actually quite negative. There isn't a lot of safety for junior doctors, or at least the ones I spoke to. And I also spoke to senior doctors who were involved in all sorts of different aspects of medical education and training. So they either worked in hospitals and had directorships of departments. Some of them worked at universities as medical educators or had done. Some were involved in administrative roles. I had a couple of nurses in the study. So people who had familiarity with the junior doctor environment also participated in the study. And across the board, there was very little evidence of benchmark places, let's put it that way. Having said that, where I am currently conducting my coaching research in the emergency department, I've amazingly stumbled onto a workplace that does seem to have the qualities that we want in a medical workplace. Everyone I've spoken to there really likes working there and have said that they live up to the claims that they make around being a centre of excellence, being a centre of care. that care extends to care of the staff. So that is gold standard workplace to me. So by the time they came to me for this study, for that particular study, we're really working on refining communication skills through coaching. So there might be some instances where people feel less confident about speaking up because they're newer or less experienced. By and large, this particular cohort of people seem to exhibit a great deal of safety, sense of safety around their ability to voice. Some of them work in other EDs where that is not the case. And
Yeah.
so what I hear about that is more in line with my PhD research on junior doctor silence. It varies. I'd have to say at this stage, the pockets of enlightened leadership are less obvious than the regular status quo of less enlightened leadership and safety.
Okay, so before I jump into this amazing emergency department model, was there any difference in gender when you were looking at junior doctors and silence that you recognized?
It's interesting. The kinds of bullying, harassment, discrimination that the junior doctors face was across the board, but certain flavors of discrimination seem to fall, seem to target different groups. So, for example, it is true that female junior doctors seem to experience more sexual harassment and abuse than male junior doctors. However, I did have some participants who are men talk to me about instances that were more reminiscent of hazing.
Mm.
Perhaps that's a term that is less known, but intimidating behavior from peers and colleagues. International medical graduates, not to say that they're the only people who experience this, but they can experience more racially or culturally oriented harassment or bullying. So I found also that men, well, there was an interesting finding around issues to do with parental trajectories and leave. So women are frequently asked about their intentions. Are they going to have children? Basically, is this going to interfere with your training, particularly if have a specialist training position? A couple of men spoke to me in detail about their struggles to obtain parental leave, which is something they very much wanted when their children were being born. So medicine in a way doesn't discriminate. It's not. It's both narrow in its discrimination and broad. So everyone can cop it on anything, whatever characteristic you might be exhibiting.
It's yeah, this is not painting a good picture, I must say.
No, sorry.
No, I'm not saying that it should be. I'm saying, wow, we have a long way to go. It
Yes.
sounds like then if everybody is potentially up for harassment, we're also expected to see a significant amount of racism or other cultural discrimination from what you're saying within your findings.
Yes, and I've also done some consulting work on this topic as well. So I can say from that these problems reach to other communities, so Indigenous junior doctors, for example. And unfortunately, the work I did in that space confirmed that these issues exist, not just within the cohort that I talked to for my PhD, but are quite frequently encountered in medicine. Yeah.
Were the people who were doing these terrible things towards junior doctors typically other doctors, institutional as well, or other members of staff? Were they junior doctors able to express who they were scared of or who they were experiencing this level of workplace non-safety?
They are mostly senior doctors. There's a massive power imbalance in the junior doctor scenario. And as you would know, and many of your listeners would know, junior doctors are beholden to the opinions and assessments and views of senior doctors who train them, who examine them, who conduct reviews of their work, etc., judge them sufficient to gain a training place, to move on to a new job, be offered a new job, all those things. So there's a lot that rides still on reputation. So it's very apparent that there's an informal process that occurs behind the administrative process of how jobs and training places are allocated that relies on reputation and standing with the people that you need to impress in order to secure the kind of role or job that you want or training place. So there's already a differential between, it's already there in terms of the medical hierarchy, which is needed. You do need people who are senior and able to take ultimate responsibility for decisions that are made, that conduct things, well, particularly if you think about an ED, there's a lot of crisis related activity happening in those environments, that you need a structure that supports that and makes that feasible. But of course, it's also open to abuse, because you then have a very stratified working environment which can be negatively used and often is in medicine. So it's not uncommon for junior doctors to even be bullied by people who are a year ahead of them, because you're stepping up in the pecking order. And if you're starting out at the bottom, you have people ahead of you who, if so inclined, may also engage in that kind of bullying behavior. So it can be hard to escape. And I know this is a very negative conversation. I'm not saying this is absolutely the case in every scenario. Not at all. I had one outlier in the study, for example, who knew she wanted to be a GP, did her mandatory 2 years of training in the hospital, had a very smooth experience. And in a very sort of a lower key hospital, it was outside the metro area, it was a smaller hospital, and she enjoyed her rotations as a junior doctor there. But she was one in many.
About was it the whole organization who was bullying on these poor doctors, or was it really the
Uh,
senior medical staff? But I
yeah,
guess I guess what I'm starting to see is, or starting to worry about is, these are our future colleagues. And yes,
mhm.
of course, we want all of our profession to be professional and have a really good foundation in medicine. But if our senior colleagues have these opinions about their junior colleagues, how do we even consider patient safety here? Because patients are women and men and people of color and of all cultural backgrounds.
There's so many issues in and around this at the level of the individual. I've actually come to see it's at the level of the occupation. So
Mm.
I distinguish between occupation and organization. Organization being the hospital
Mhm.
environment. So my research is hospital based. Occupation being the medical profession, and that people become medical professionals or nascent medical professionals before they become employees in the hospital organization, and that the medical profession has a very strong hold in those institutions, in those hospitals. Obviously there are senior people who are running the show, who are doing the clinical work, etc. They're also the same people who are working in universities, teaching medical students, who are particularly running the medical colleges, who oversee all the specialties. So there's a whole piece that's around where is this occupation as a whole at? Yeah. So there's that bit. So the question was,
Are our medical professionals safe towards our patients? If we're
mm,
seeing this level of bullying and harassment and discrimination based projected towards our colleagues, how do we not do that towards our patients? Like, is the whole culture safe?
yeah, that's a great question because that is the natural extension of the trickle down effect that I mentioned earlier. If if and I haven't looked at this aspect, but it would make a fascinating study. You know, is it possible that the behaviors that junior doctors experience are then foisted onto patients, for example? I think that's what you're saying. Does this make it unsafe for people who are perhaps most vulnerable in the chain? It's a wonderful question, and it needs attention. It wasn't within scope of my project, but it's very possible. I would say in most junior doctors' favour, though, most aren't in the business of harming patients. In fact, they tend in the opposite direction. They're self-sacrificing,
Mm,
and a lot of them approach the whole business of being silent as part of that self-sacrifice. So it becomes silent sacrifice. And so they tolerate a lot, and patients are the last people they want to harm. They will take it on themselves rather than do that. At least that's been my experience of the junior doctors I've met, and most are struggling to fulfill their obligations without harming people. And I don't mean because they're incompetent. I mean because they're often overworked, as we
mm,
touched on earlier. They're fatigued. They're not given the necessary support that they require, whether it's that kind of fatigue management or being clinically supported to do their work. Some are left on their own, often to run huge wards at night or at least take care of them in the evenings, sometimes on their own. Terrifying sorts of scenarios that most people outside the profession can barely comprehend, but have been a feature of the profession for a long time. This is part of your training. I
mm.
was speaking yesterday with a fellow coach who has some connections also in healthcare, but actually comes from a military background. And we were talking about the fact that in the military, they operate on a break you down to build you up kind of ethos. And it's not a lot different in medicine as far as I can see. So these kinds of, let's say, often quite brutal working conditions and the bullying and the teaching by humiliation and what have you, I believe tactics the profession uses to ensure junior doctors are sufficiently so-called trained to behave in a certain way and are compliant and and go along with the status quo.
Oh, this is a big mouthful to swallow.
Yes, yes, and I want to do a lot more on this topic on and writing about it, and that's why I like talking about it too, because I feel like it needs to be outed.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
agree.
and we've seen, you agree?
Yeah, I do. I do agree. To my point, and I'm not sure I made it correctly. If a senior doctor is bullying their junior doctor because they are female or because they are of a certain race or because they are IMG, how are they not also discriminating against their patients who are female,
Oh,
a certain
I see.
race, of a certain color, of a certain gender? You can see how if this is the sort of behavior you're going to put towards a future junior, like a future colleague, we're also presumably within this human
Mm.
having other ways that they're expressing these acts towards their own patients. Maybe they're
Mm.
disregarding somebody's story because of gender or race or background. So it gives me the heebie-jeebies about, if we're going to treat our junior colleagues like this, how are they not treating their patients like this also? Not necessarily the harassment and bullying, but the disregard, the discrimination, the racism. It's showing me a picture of, this is a broken system, and I absolutely am feeling all the weight for our junior doctors still in this system. And having come through this system, I can tell you, you're right. You're right. There were areas and pockets where I personally had a voice and
Mm.
felt like I had the psychological safety to talk about my workplace conditions. But there were certainly, what you're describing, that's a lived experience.
Mm. And I hope it's okay to talk about it. And I hope that the people who are listening to this don't feel too triggered by what I'm saying and what we're talking about.
I think
And
it's good to know that they're not alone. They're not alone, and they're not crazy for thinking that they're having this experience. And we want to have your voice amplified because we don't want this for our junior doctors, and we don't want this to continue in medicine. And I really am
no,
grateful for your work, Victoria. And I think it's really important that you've come from a space that's not within the culture, but with a heart that says, this isn't okay. It's not okay because it has a trickle-down effect. It's not okay because it has a lifelong effect on these humans that are being subjected to this.
absolutely. And I feel very privileged to have this insider outsider perspective. And I agree that I come with less of the baggage that might be present in someone who is actually has been through the system because, and I'm talking about the occupation again here rather than the hospital organization, even though they work hand in glove in many respects, but occupation first. You become a medical professional, as I said before, you become an employee. And part of that process, and this has been written about, is a socialization process that is designed to divest you of your aspects of your previous identity and recast you into the mold of medical professional. So you're literally taught how to behave and be. But yes, and this is a very vulnerable place. You're also put into situations where you don't actually have a lot of time to reflect on your situation. So
Mm,
in med school, that's all about exams and getting
mhm,
through that. When you step into the hospital as an intern, it then and beyond, it then becomes about surviving that. And if you go into further training, you've then got the increased pressure of more exams, more
mhm,
debt, more stress, more juggling, and often at a time where a lot of people are contemplating families, starting families, mortgages. The whole thing colludes to create an environment in which there's not a lot of time and space for to question what it is you're experiencing. And by that stage, you're so invested, you've already spent enormous amounts of time and usually money, resources on becoming a doctor. Most people adopt the I'll just do what I take to get what I can to get through. And then once I get to consultant or once I get to whatever, it'll improve, or I'll have
mm,
time to do it, or I'll be able to speak up more. I did find that junior doctors who get engaged in what we call in academia service work is so leadership roles, for example. So that can start as early as med school, of course. You could become a member of AMSA or lead some sort of group. Those who go on to do that kind of work once they're in the working environment, they they have a an ability to navigate the whole thing more successfully than those who don't. And I've found this with my own experience as a research degree student. So I've been doing higher degree by research student representative work for 10 years now because I've been a research student for that length of time. And like the junior doctors in the PhD work, that kind of activity allows you to meet people, form connections, understand the system that you're in, whether it's the hospital environment, whether it's the college environment, or even the university environment, and all the satellite sort of groups around that. You understand the ecosystem you're in a lot more, and you
Hmm.
have more avenues for support if something comes up. Now, hopefully, you're also doing that in order to advocate on behalf of your colleagues. But it's true, and the people I spoke to in the research who sought out those kind of roles from a very genuine place, not just CV buffing, but uh, they had more agency. They had
Mm.
more ability to speak up, but not entirely. They still faced the same barriers as everyone else. They still had people to impress. That's a
Mhm.
horrible way to say it, but it is a lot about reputation management being a junior doctor because you become known as the good worker or the bad worker or the troublemaker or whatever it is. So it's a very delicate situation, and I experience the same thing in academia as well. Another elite
Mm.
profession where it's very hierarchical, there's a lot of bullying. It's just not as evident, it's more subtle, and we don't have life and death situations generally. So it's not as obvious a concern, but I
Interesting.
understand the dynamics that occur.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit more about this emergency department who have engaged leadership, who are now wanting to refine their communication even further. I think this is like we're going to put them up on a little bit about what is going on in there that is going so much differently than what you've otherwise seen in your research.
Can I talk about another workplace that I've encountered where this is
Yeah,
even more evident or more evident to
absolutely.
me? Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I did some other consulting work for a group that supports doctors and other health professionals to think about well-being at work.
Hmm.
And through that channel, I met a doctor in Perth in Western Australia and became aware of work he and his colleague, another doctor, by this stage, they're both clinical administrators in a very large hospital, work that they had done to completely turn their junior doctor workforce problems around. So,
Wow.
as you would well know, and many listeners would know, there's the medical training survey conducted annually here in Australia, which effectively invites every junior doctor in the country to report on their experiences. And one of the things that comes out of those surveys are essentially tables that are publicly available that rank each hospital in terms of their performance. So this particular hospital was not performing well and hadn't done so for a long time. They also had a lot of massive locum bills. They had to hire in a lot of locums to account for the gaps in their junior doctor workforce. So essentially, there is a great imperative just from a financial perspective to solve this problem. So once these doctors stepped into their senior roles, they they did the smart thing, and they did a very simple thing. They invited their junior doctors to talk to them about their
Hmm.
concerns. Why was the place being rated so low? Why didn't people want to work there? That's pretty basic, isn't it?
Hmm.
So the next thing they did, which is also very simple, was that they listened.
Hmm.
And then the next thing that they did was that they acted on those concerns. So they identified a whole lot of things that the junior doctors were concerned about, issues like leave, trying to obtain leave, not being able to obtain leave, pay came into it, voice came into it, or lack of suitable voice mechanisms, concerns about probably any number of the things that concern junior doctors, and I can't remember all the details right now, but it is out there in the literature as well. I can let you know what that study is
That'd be perfect. Yes.
in case listeners are interested. But uh, essentially, they listened, they asked, listened, and acted,
Yeah.
and amazing results. Within 6 months of implementing concrete changes, they completely reversed the situation. They had pretty much every position fully subscribed. They had people who wanted to work there. And I met some of the junior doctors involved in this process. They actually involved the representative junior doctors in the affairs of managing this process. So they would attend meetings, they would engage with the head honchos of various departments, etc. And it was a very genuine and simple and effective strategy. And it's not rocket science. If you want to create these environments, just simply ask the people who are struggling why and genuinely address their concerns. Now, where this has ended up long term, I don't know. I will have a look at this year's training survey results, but I do know that the main lead on that, the senior doctor, is now working in health. I'm imagining to try and implement similar things in other organizations. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that to me was a spectacular example of how to overcome these issues quite easily,
Mm.
quite simply.
When
Yeah.
I to some of Adam Grant's work, he's an occupational psychologist, and he talks about just asking the question, "What do you need?" But with the resources behind it to be able to meet that need can be so empowering for a staff, an employee, a team member. The what do you need? And even sometimes identifying what you need is difficult if you've never been asked that question and you don't believe the person's actually going to take any interest in you. But it sounds like this team actually were interested in what do you need? Tell me what's going on and how we can make improvements. And we have the budget, resources, and manpower to make this happen. What an incredible story. I think that's really valuable.
It's powerful, isn't it?
Hmm.
And in terms of the other hospital, I don't know enough about its history and inner workings to know how and why it's come to be a place where people want to work. I do recall when I was first became aware of the potential to get some funding to do some work in this hospital, in this ED. I was shown through the ED by the research manager who said people people really like working here and they want to work here. I didn't
Mm.
believe him
Mm.
because I've heard so many terrible stories from the people I speak with who work in less
Yeah.
kind environments. And sure enough, as I've come to know my research participants who I'm coaching as well as, collecting data from at either end, that it's true. It's
It's
true.
genuine. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. So
And I would have to say again, enlightened leadership.
yeah.
So the uh, whoever the medical director is, the director of nursing, those people are doing an amazing job. I won't say it's perfect. Nowhere's perfect, but I'm deeply impressed by what I'm hearing. I mean, it's not the purpose of my research to inquire about the nature of the workplace,
Mm.
even though it's a related theme. But yeah, as far as it has come up, it's genuine.
Well, very grateful for this conversation, Victoria. This has been excellent. Thank you so much for shining a light on the issues happening to our junior doctors, even if it's to help us bring awareness of how we might help a junior colleague. I think that's so incredibly powerful to have an understanding that the person in front of me, this junior doctor, may be really having difficulty with the ability to have a voice. I think that, if nothing else, has been incredibly impactful. Thank you for your work.
Oh, you're welcome. I guess it's at this stage, it's more exposing the problem. Solving the issue is a difficult proposition, but I think understanding more about it is a start. And I do
Yeah.
hope, that support, get support, whether it's a friend, a family member, another doctor who you trust, someone outside. That's how you do it. Don't, it's very isolating experience.
Mm.
And it's that isolation is is very, very problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. We want connection is such a good antidote for some of the things that we've been talking about today. So thank you again. I really appreciate you shining some light in this area. I look forward to reading your research when it comes out. Please share that with us.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, if you found this podcast episode helpful, I would encourage you to like and subscribe. Every time you do, you help a colleague or friend find our podcast, and it can help them too. Don't forget to share it along with your friends. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget we have Charting Champions for physicians and Smarter Charting for nurse practitioners and other clinicians to help you get home with your work done. We are helping you create sustainable clinical medicine. Thanks for listening.